They stood before me like prosecutors in a courtroom, my own son and his wife, their eyes filled with arrogance. With voices sharp as blades, it gave me an ultimatum. Leave the house within a month, or be forced out. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure to subscribe to Extreme Revenge for more gripping stories. And comment your country name below. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. My name is Gregory Allen, and this is the story of how their ultimatum turned into the greatest regret of their lives. The living room. Once a place of laughter and warmth, felt more like a courtroom that day. My son, Michael, stood tall in his crisp suit, briefcase still in hand, as if he had just come from one of his trials. His wife, Dr. Julia, crossed her arms, her white coat still on from her shift at the hospital. They didn't even sit down. They just stood in front of me, side by side like a wall of judgment. "Dad," Michael began, his voice cold, calculated. "We've talked about this. You're not getting any younger. Managing this house is too much for you. It's time you moved out," Julia added quickly, almost rehearsed. "We've decided that in 1 month, you should pack your things and find a smaller place. It's better for you, more manageable, safer." But their words were wrapped in lies. I could see it in their eyes, hear it in their tone. They weren't worried about me. They were circling like vultures, eyeing the property, the land, the home I had built with my own 2 hands, the home their mother and I had filled with love for decades. I sat there in silence, my hands resting on the armrest of my chair. My heart didn't race. My voice didn't rise. I just looked at them, my son, whom I had raised with every ounce of strength I had, and his wife, whom I had welcomed into my family as my own daughter. They thought my silence was weakness, but it wasn't. It was calculation. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back. This house wasn't just a building of bricks and wood. It was the story of my life. I bought the land when I was only 27, a time when all I had was a worn-out truck, a pair of calloused hands, and a dream. I worked construction during the day and laid bricks for my own foundation at night. It took years of sweat, sacrifice, and countless setbacks. But eventually, the house rose to stories. Wide porch, tall oak trees out front. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise. A promise to my wife, Eleanor, that we would raise our children in a place filled with love, safety, and stability. And we did. For 30 years, this house was alive with birthdays. Christmas mornings, Thanksgivings crowded with family, and late-night talks by the fire. When Eleanor passed away 10 years ago, this house became my anchor. Every wall whispered her presence. Every room held her memory. I stayed because leaving felt like losing her all over again. Michael knew all of this. He grew up here. He learned to ride his bike in the driveway, scraped his knees on the same porch steps he now stood in front of with disdain. And Julia, though she hadn't grown up here, had once said she admired the house, that it felt like home. But success changes people. Michael was always ambitious, and I admired that about him. He went to law school, worked long hours, and climbed the ladder. Julia became a doctor, saving lives and earning respect. Together, they became what people call a power couple.
I was so proud.
But somewhere along the way, pride turned into entitlement. They began to look down on me, to see me not as their father, not as the man who sacrificed everything for them, but as an obstacle. First came the subtle comments. "Dad, don't you think this house is too big for you alone? Dad, maybe you should think about moving into an apartment. Easier to maintain." Then the tone sharpened. "This place is falling apart. You can't keep up with it. You really think it makes sense for you to stay here by yourself?" And finally, the ultimatum. "You have 1 month to move out." That night, after they left the room, I sat alone in the quiet. The clock ticked, the wind rustled the old oak trees outside, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since Eleanor's death. Anger. Not the kind that flares up and burns out quickly, but the kind that simmers deep, steady, patient. I thought about everything I had given them. The nights I worked overtime so Michael could go to law school. The mornings Eleanor and I skipped meals so we could pay for his textbooks. The countless times we drove Julia to her late-night shifts when her car broke down. And now, they had the audacity to treat me like a burden. They thought their success gave them the right to dictate my life. They thought they could strip me of my dignity and throw me out of my own home. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. They didn't know that behind my silence was a storm brewing. They gave me 1 month. I would use that month to give them a lesson they would never forget. The next day, I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. I brewed my morning coffee, watered the garden, and sat on the porch with the newspaper. But inside, my mind was turning gears, piece by piece, forming a plan. I knew their game. Michael and Julia wanted the house. It wasn't about my safety or convenience. It was about the property's value. Real estate prices in our neighborhood had skyrocketed. This house wasn't just worth sentimental value. It was worth millions, and they wanted it. But what they didn't know was that so did other people. Developers, investors, families looking for a forever home. I had options, more options than they imagined. So while they spent the next few weeks smirking at me, dropping hints and reminding me of the ticking clock, I spent those same weeks in quiet preparation. I met with real estate agents. I fielded offers. I reviewed contracts every step of the way. I pictured their faces when they realized the truth. They thought the ultimatum would end with me leaving, but it would end with them begging. By the second week, Michael's arrogance grew unbearable. "Dad," he said, one evening over dinner, his fork clinking against his plate, "Julia and I have been thinking. Once you move out, we can renovate the place. Open up the kitchen, add a pool in the back. It'll really make the property shine." Julia smiled, sipping her wine. Yes, it'll finally reach its full potential. They talked about my home like it was already theirs. Like I was just a guest passing through. I nodded quietly, hiding the fire in my chest. Let them dream. Let them decorate the house in their minds. It would only make the fall that much harder. By the third week, they grew impatient. "Have you started packing yet?" Julia asked casually. "Do you need help finding an apartment?" Michael added, his voice laced with fake concern. I simply smiled and said, "Don't worry. Everything will be ready by the deadline." And oh, it would. The final week came quickly. I signed the papers, finalized the deal, and secured my plan. The house was sold not to Michael, not to Julia, not to anyone they could control. But they didn't know that yet. All they knew was that the ultimatum they had given me was about to expire, and I was ready. The days leading up to the deadline passed with a strange calmness. Michael and Julia thought they had one. They walked around the house with the air of owners, not guests. Every evening when they returned from work, they spoke more openly about their plans for the place. "Once Dad's gone, we can finally knock out this wall," Julia said one night. Running her hand along the dining room divider, "This whole section could open up into the living room. Imagine the dinner parties." Michael nodded with satisfaction. "And I'll finally have that home office I deserve. Right here, overlooking the garden. Prestige matters when clients visit." They didn't even look at me as they spoke. I was invisible in the very home I had built. Just an old man waiting for his time to expire. But I smiled. Not out of agreement, but out of a deeper, more dangerous satisfaction. Because every time they spoke, every time they revealed another dream they had for this house, they didn't realize they were weaving their own downfall. The third week ended, and the final week began. That Monday, Michael stood in the kitchen doorway, adjusting his tie before leaving for work. "Dad," he said casually, "you've got just 6 days left now. Don't leave things to the last minute. You know how complicated moving can be." I sipped my coffee, calm as the morning sun. "Don't worry, son. Everything will be handled." Julia chimed in from the hallway, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "We should probably bring in a cleaning service after you move out, Greg. I mean, no offense, but the place could use a refresh before we start renovating." Her tone was sharp, almost dismissive. The kind of tone you use for someone beneath you, not family. I simply nodded. Letting the bitterness of their words slide off me, they wanted me to feel small. What they didn't realize was that I was holding all the cards. As the days counted down, my preparations were nearly complete. The house was no longer mine, not legally, not financially. The papers were signed. The deal was closed. The money was in the bank, $3 million. More than enough to start a new chapter of my life. More than enough to remind Michael and Julia that greed can blind even the sharpest lawyer and the most intelligent doctor. But they still didn't know, and so I kept playing my role. The tired old man, too weak to fight back, to resign, to resist. Let them believe. Let them laugh. The storm was almost here. By Thursday, Julia began measuring the windows. She walked around with a notepad, scribbling dimensions, muttering about curtains and shades. "I think silk drapes here," she said to Michael, standing in the living room, "and maybe a chandelier above the dining table." Michael grinned. "Yeah, this place is going to look like something out of a magazine once we're done." I sat in my recliner, watching them without a word. The same recliner where Eleanor once read bedtime stories to Michael when he was a boy. Now he stood in the same room, blind to the history, deaf to the love that had once filled these walls. They thought the past no longer mattered. But I was about to remind them. Friday night was the worst. Michael came home in high spirits, a bottle of champagne in hand. "Dad," he called out, his voice booming. "We're celebrating tonight. Only 2 days left." Julia and I thought, why not toast to new beginnings? Julia popped the cork with a squeal of delight, pouring glasses. She handed one to Michael, one to herself, and then, after a brief hesitation, one to me, to the future, Michael declared, raising his glass. Julia smirked. "To our home." They clinked glasses, their laughter filling the room. I lifted mine slowly, looking at them with a steady gaze. "Two endings," I said softly, before taking a sip. They didn't catch the meaning, but they would. Soon, and then came Saturday. The deadline. The house was quiet that morning, almost eerily so. I woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table as sunlight streamed through the windows at 9 o'clock sharp. Michael and Julia came downstairs, already dressed for the day. Julia wore her usual professional attire, though she'd added a bright scarf maybe to mark the occasion. Michael was in casual clothes, but his face carried that same smug grin I had grown so used to. "Well, Dad," he said, pulling out a chair across from me, "today's the big day. Do you have your things packed?" Julia chimed in before I could answer. "We already spoke to a realtor about listing the house once you're settled somewhere else. We'll handle the paperwork, of course. Don't worry about it." I stirred my coffee slowly, then looked up at them both. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "Actually," I said, "there's something I need to show you." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I reached for the envelope sitting on the table beside me, thick, official, the kind of envelope that carried weight. I slid it across the table toward him. "The house." Michael frowned, picking it up. He tore it open carelessly, skimming the pages inside. And then his eyes froze. His face drained of color. "What? What is this?" he muttered. Julia leaned over, snatching the papers from his hands. Her eyes widened, her mouth dropping open. You sold the house?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly. "Yes, the house was mine. I decided it was time to move on. I sold it." Julia's voice cracked with panic. But you can't just..." This was supposed to Michael cut her off, his voice rising. "For how much? Who did you sell it to?" I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before answering. $3 million, paid in full. The new owners will take possession next week. The room went silent. For the first time in weeks, they didn't look arrogant. They didn't look smug. They looked powerless. Michael slammed his fist on the table. "Why would you do this, Dad? This was our home, our future." I met his fury with calm. "No, Michael. This was my home. Your mother and I built it together. You grew up here, yes? But it was never yours to take. And after the way you both treated me, after the ultimatum, you left me no choice." Julia shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. We didn't mean it like that. We just thought you thought wrong, I interrupted, my voice firm. You gave me 1 month to leave. I honored your deadline, but I didn't leave quietly. I made sure the house will never belong to you. Michael's face twisted with disbelief. But $3 million? That could have been ours. You could have given it to us, to your family. My family? I said sharply, leaning forward. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. Family doesn't toss ultimatums at the man who gave them everything. You two lost the right to call this place yours the moment you tried to push me out. The begging began. Dad, please, Julia whispered, her voice trembling. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were just stressed. We thought it was best for you. Michael's arrogance cracked into desperation. Dad, you can undo this, right? Call the buyers. Cancel the deal. Tell them it was a mistake. We'll take care of you, we promise. But I shook my head. It's done. The papers are signed. The money is in the bank, and I've already made plans for what comes next. Their faces fell, the reality sinking in. For once, the power was mine, and I wasn't about to let it go. Michael stood frozen, the contract still trembling in his hands. His lips moved, but no words came out. Julia pressed her palms flat on the table as if steadying herself against a sudden earthquake. Their grand plans, their imagined future, ripped out from under them in a single stroke of my pen. I watched the two of them, not with cruelty, but with a steady calm. For weeks they had strutted through this house as though they were its rightful heirs, treating me like an unwelcome guest. Now, stripped of the illusion, they looked like frightened children. Finally, Michael broke the silence. You can't do this, he snapped, his voice sharp, almost desperate. Dad, this house is our legacy. Mom would have wanted it to stay in the family. At the mention of Eleanor, my late wife, something twisted in my chest. For a moment, her face flickered in my mind, soft eyes, gentle smile. The way she always kept this family together with her warmth. She was the glue we all depended on. And I thought to myself, would she have forgiven them for what they've done to me? Or would she have seen what I see now, their greed, their lack of respect? I took a slow breath before answering. Don't you dare use your mother to excuse your behavior. She raised you better than this, Michael. Eleanor believed in kindness, respect, loyalty. Do you think she'd approve of the way you gave me an ultimatum in my own home? Michael's jaw clenched, his face burning red. Julia reached for his arm, trying to steady him, but she looked just as lost. Greg, she whispered, her voice shaking. We were under pressure. You have to understand. We weren't trying to hurt you. It's just that the house is so valuable, and you thought, I cut in sharply, that you could bully an old man out of his home. You thought you could cash in on your mother-in-law's death, twist her memory into leverage. You thought wrong? The room fell silent again. Michael slumped into the chair opposite me, running his hands through his hair. For once, he didn't look like the polished lawyer, the man who always had a clever answer. He looked small, defeated. $3 million, he muttered under his breath. $3 million, gone. It wasn't yours to lose, I reminded him calmly, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were distant, calculating, already spiraling into panic. Julia knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. We can fix this, she said softly, almost to herself. Maybe we can appeal. Maybe we can find a loophole. Michael, you're a lawyer, can't you? Can't you undo it somehow? Michael shook his head. If Dad signed it, if the money's transferred, it's airtight. There's no undoing this. His voice cracked. It's over. Julia's face went pale. She turned to me, her voice breaking now with emotion. Greg, please. Don't do this. Don't leave us with nothing. I felt the weight of her words, but I stayed firm. I'm not leaving you with nothing. You both still have your careers, your health, your youth. What you don't have, I said, my tone hardening, is this house. And you don't have me at your mercy anymore. The next hours stretched like years. They followed me from room to room, their voices shifting like waves, pleading, reasoning, guilt-tripping. Dad, Mom would hate this. Greg, you're punishing us too harshly. You can't abandon your own son. You'll die alone if you keep this up. But no matter what tactic they tried, my answer remained the same. The decision is made. By late afternoon, their pleas had turned to fury. Michael stormed into the kitchen, slamming cabinets. Julia snapped at me, her voice sharp with resentment. You think you've won, Greg? You think this makes you powerful? You're just an old man running away. You'll regret this. You'll regret leaving us. I turned to her, my eyes steady. No, Julia, I regret nothing. What I regret is letting you both believe that cruelty and entitlement had no consequences. Consider this your lesson, she faltered, unable to hold my gaze. That night, when the house finally fell quiet, I sat alone in the living room. My hand rested on the arm of the recliner Eleanor used to sit in. For a moment, I let the memories wash over me. Her laughter in the kitchen, the way she decorated the house for Christmas every year, the smell of her Sunday pot roast wafting through the halls. This was more than a house. It was a life, a history, a piece of us. But it was also a weapon now, one I had used to remind my son that family isn't a bank account, and loyalty can't be bought. As I sat there, I whispered quietly into the silence, as though Eleanor could still hear me. I hope you understand why I did this. I hope you'd be proud. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. The next morning, the desperation reached its peak. Michael and Julia cornered me in the hallway before I could leave for my morning walk. Michael's face was pale, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Dad, he said, his voice hoarse, we made a mistake. Please, please don't walk away from us. Julia clasped her hands together, her voice trembling. We'll change, Greg. We'll do better. We'll take care of you. Just don't leave us like this. I studied them both. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the ultimatum. The coldness in their voices when they told me I had a month to leave my own home. The smug looks when they measured windows and planned renovations, while I sat invisible in the corner. No, they didn't deserve my pity. I gave you a month, I said firmly. You gave me ultimatums. Now I've given you mine. The house is gone. My life here is done. It's time for me to move forward with or without you. Their faces fell. The final shred of hope extinguished. I walked past them, the weight of their silence following me down the hallway. Later that evening, I overheard them in the living room. Julia was crying softly. We pushed him too far. We should have never forced him. Michael's voice was raw, stripped of arrogance. We thought he'd cave. We thought he was weak. There was a long pause. Then, in a whisper so low, I almost missed it, he said, we were wrong. And with those words, I knew my revenge was complete. The sun rose over the house one final time, casting golden light across the yard where Michael once played as a boy. It should have been a morning filled with nostalgia, a farewell steeped in gratitude. Instead, it was heavy with tension. Every corner of the home echoing with the sound of footsteps that didn't belong anymore. The buyers would arrive in just a few hours. The papers were signed, the deal sealed. Today, the house would no longer be mine. And yet as I stood at the window, staring out at the familiar oak tree Eleanor planted decades ago, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and strength. This wasn't just about a house. This was about dignity, about respect, about teaching my son a lesson he would never forget. Michael and Julia hadn't spoken much since the contract reveal. They moved like shadows through the halls, avoiding me, avoiding each other. But that morning, as the reality loomed over them, they finally broke their silence. Michael appeared in the doorway of the living room, his eyes hollow. Dad, are you really going through with this? I turned, meeting his gaze. It's already done, Michael. The buyers will be here soon. Julia followed him in, her face pale, lips trembling. Greg, please. We can fix this. We'll change. We'll make this house a home again with you in it. Just don't give it away to strangers. Strangers. I asked softly, almost bitterly. Is that what you think I've done? No, what I've done is make sure you never take what wasn't yours. I didn't give this house away. I sold it. And I'll use that money to live the life I deserve. Julia's eyes filled with tears. But we're your family. You can't just... I can't. I cut her off, my voice firm. Because you gave me no choice. Family doesn't throw ultimatums. Family doesn't measure curtains while their father is still alive in the house. Family doesn't treat me like a burden. Michael flinched. The words hit harder than any physical blow. The doorbell rang around noon. The new owners, a young couple, maybe in their 30s, walked in with wide smiles and eager eyes. They greeted me warmly, thanking me for the opportunity to buy such a beautiful home. Their voices were filled with the kind of awe and respect that Michael and Julia had long forgotten. I handed them the keys. The metal was cool in my palm, but heavy, as though carrying decades of memories. This house has history, I told them quietly. Take care of it. The woman nodded, her eyes shining. We will. Behind me, Julia let out a stifled sob. Michael stood stiff, his hands clenched into fists, his pride crumbling in silence. The young couple walked through the house, marveling at every detail. They saw beauty where Michael and Julia had seen only profit. That alone told me I had made the right decision, as the couple disappeared into another room. Michael turned to me, his voice breaking. Dad, you've destroyed us. Do you understand that? You've ruined everything. I looked at him steadily. No, Michael. I didn't destroy you. I held up a mirror. I showed you what greed and arrogance look like when reflected back. You destroyed yourselves the moment you forgot what mattered. Julia's tears flowed freely now. We were wrong. We were selfish. But please, Greg, give us another chance. We're begging you. For a moment, silence hung between us. Their words might have softened another man, but not me. Not anymore. I shook my head slowly. It's too late. Some lessons can't be undone. This is one of them. When the couple returned, we finalized the exchange. I walked them to the door, congratulating them on their new home. They thanked me again, oblivious to the storm brewing behind them. I stepped outside with them, the cool air hitting my face like a cleansing wave. For a moment, I looked back at the house. My house, one last time. Memories flooded me. Eleanor's laughter, Michael's first steps, Christmas mornings, birthdays, the sound of life echoing through the walls. It hurt to let it go, but it hurt more to stay in a place poisoned by betrayal. As I stood there, Julia's voice carried through the doorway. Greg, please, don't leave us like this. I turned to her, my expression steady. I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with a lesson you'll never forget. Her sobs filled the air. Michael remained silent, staring at the floor, too broken to speak. That evening, after the couple had officially taken possession, I packed the last of my belongings into the car. Just a few bags, clothes, photos, essentials. The money was in the bank, and my future was wide open. Michael and Julia stood on the porch as I loaded the trunk. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by regret. Where will you go? Michael asked quietly, almost like a child again. I paused, looking at him with the faintest trace of a smile. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere I can live the rest of my life with dignity. Somewhere your mother would have been proud of. His eyes welled up, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, swallowing his pride. I closed the trunk and walked to the driver's seat. But before I got in, I turned back one last time. Remember this day? I told them. Because from now on, every time you look at this house, you'll remember the lesson. Respect can't be demanded. Love can't be bought. And greed will cost you everything. Their faces said it all. The message had landed. I drove away as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house grew smaller in my rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. For the first time in months, I felt free. Eleanor's memory stayed with me. Not in the walls of a house, but in my heart. I whispered to her as the road stretched ahead. I did it, love. I finally stood up for myself. And I think you'd be proud. A tear slipped down my cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was relief. Liberation. Because revenge isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence, the quiet power of walking away, leaving those who wronged you to sit with the weight of their choices, and that was exactly what I had done.